yesterday, the United States midterm elections will be held on November the 8th. All 435 House of Representatives seats are up for election, as well as 35 of the 100 senators. Campaigns are heating up by both Democrats and Republicans, this even as the future of President Biden's political career remains at stake in the coming polls. In the latest, Biden said issues like abortion and the economy are key, and just 3 weeks from the US midterm elections, President Joe Biden's approval rating stayed close to the lowest level of his presidency. Biden's unpopularity is helping drive the view that Republicans will win control of the US House of Representatives on November the 8th, though experts say Democrats have a better chance of keeping the Senate. According to the latest polls, 26% mentioned worries over the economy as the top issue, while 18% listed inflation, which is at its highest rate in 4 decades. During his impassioned speech on abortion, the president tapped into widespread anger over the Supreme Court's decision to overturn the half-century-old Roe versus Wade ruling. Later, the US president will campaign alongside Senate candidate John Fetterman in Pennsylvania, which is ground zero in the Democrats' struggle to avoid a wipeout in the midterms. Biden will visit both Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, touting his administration's signature infrastructure spending package. Analysts say Pennsylvania is among a handful of races Democrats must win to keep the Senate after November the 8th, while the tussle for the House is even tougher. Biden's attempts to shift momentum have so far had limited effect.
Virtually all of the COVID death, virtually all of the COVID support. What we're doing is how to pay for these programs. And jobs, more than any administration has done in the first 6 months of being in office. Again, thanks to all of you. And with our bipartisan infrastructure framework, I think it's time for us to stop now so we can get started with our meeting. This report as to where I think we are and the job you're doing in the first 6 months. The pandemic. I know folks are watching the number of cases rising again and wondering, quite frankly, what it means to them. But overall, COVID-19 deaths are down dramatically, and these last 6 months, especially with the Delta variant that's out there. While COVID-19 cases are rising, virtually all of the COVID deaths, virtually all of the COVID support, what we're doing is how to pay for these programs. And jobs, more than any administration has done in the first 6 months of being in office. Again, thanks to all of you. And with our bipartisan infrastructure.
Well, we're joined by Susan Tehrani now from New York. Susan, thanks so much for joining us on WION. Just how key is places like Pennsylvania in these upcoming midterms?
Pennsylvania is a key swing state. It's often a barometer on what happens for the rest of the country. We often see states like Pennsylvania really garner headlines when it comes to issues of governing crime, industry, and labor. So it's extremely important, and that's why we see that the president is heading over there today to talk about his agenda and his infrastructure plan on the one hand, and then privately campaign with Senate Democratic contender, the incumbent John Fetterman, on the other, in hopes of winning Pennsylvania in a very tightly knit Senate race right now against Republican Dr. Mehmet Oz. What's interesting is that we haven't really seen John Fetterman publicly campaign with President Joe Biden. We will see them side to side today, and one of the reasons for that is because the president himself is facing such low approval ratings. However, when it comes to the issue of infrastructure, bridges, tunnels, so on and so forth, that's something that the president likes to be front and center on. And I think that's why that John Fetterman wants to stand next to Joe Biden. But it's one of the states that will be detrimental in which side the Senate moves towards ultimately. So it's very important to watch. Dr. Oz endorsed by Donald Trump, John Fetterman talking about legalizing weed. You know, before he said he's been anti-fracking, now he says he's pro-fracking. A lot of parts of Pennsylvania rely on energy and fracking at a time when gas prices are very high. That's going to be a determining issue. So really, you know, one might say it's ground zero right now.
And just we've heard Republicans and Democrats both, you know, give out what they're looking to get voters on side for leading up to these midterm elections. Just how do the Democrats sit right now, you know, 3 weeks away from the vote?
Right. You know, it's interesting when we talk about, let's just talk about Pennsylvania, for example. There are so many determining factors right now. For example, inflation, the economy, gas prices going up. But the problem is someone like John Fetterman, who's running for the Senate, he's focusing on issues, again, like legalizing weed or being soft on crime. And he's not really focusing on issues that are important to mainstream voters. And then on the other hand, you have the majority of Democrats really pushing for the pro-life and abortion agenda at a time when even a New York Times poll recently came out and said that only 5% of the population, at least those that were polled, said that abortion is their major priority. So it's very hard to determine whether or not they can get back on track on the economy and inflation at a time when the economy is doing so bad, and whether or not they have an alternative right now to President Biden's agenda. Although he is not on the ballot, at the end of the day, his policies are, and whether they like it or not, they're part of his party.
That's Susan Tehrani in New York. Susan, thanks so much for joining us and giving us your insights on that story. Susan in New York there.